In 2023, Armstrong Powerhouse released the Class 142 2.0 rolling stock pack for Train Simulator. This pack replaces the one that was previously produced in association with Waggonz. The model in this new pack was produced by Dovetail Games. The Class 142, also known by its family brand name Pacer, was a diesel multiple unit constructed jointly by British Rail in Derby and Leyland in Workington. They were built between 1985 and 1987, replacing many of the first generation DMUs from the 1960s. As an economy measure, the trains were cheaply constructed. Their bodies and components were derived from a highly successful Leyland National Bus. The 142s were first introduced to service in the northwest and southwest of England. The lack of conventional bogies and a long wheelbase provided a rather bouncy ride over jointed track. The trains had quickly earned themselves the nickname of Nodding Donkeys. In the southwest, they were cleverly or not so cleverly branded as Skippers by British Rail. The trains were not popular in the southwest due to their excessive wheel flange squeal over tight curves, most particularly on the Cornish branches. Ultimately, the 96-strong fleet would be seen operating across the entirety of northern England and the Welsh valleys. The 142s were originally powered by a Leyland TL11 engine and an RRE5 self-changing gearbox. The box, however, was proving to be unreliable, and during the early 1990s, a Voith T211, the same type of transmission that had been in use across the Sprinter family, was experimentally fitted and successfully trialled. With TL11 engine parts becoming harder to source, it was later decided to replace them with Cummins LTA10s. In 1999, their crashworthiness was questioned when 142008 was completely destroyed in a collision with a Class 87 hauling a passenger train. Miraculously, there were no deaths, and this was down to the prompt actions of the 87's driver. Human error was the cause of the accident, and 27 were injured. Later, their safety would come under further scrutiny following a number of derailments, some of which were caused by detaching components. Despite this, the 142s would soldier on until their final withdrawal in 2020. Whilst the majority of 142s had been sent for scrap, love them or hate them, a number of units have wormed their way into preservation by Heritage Railways. Locomotive Services Limited at Crewe also have units 003 and 007. 003 is currently mainline registered for use on rail tours. Additionally, a small handful of 142s have made their way to private owners for conversion into classrooms, living accommodation and police training amongst other uses. Roughly a decade ago, Waggonz collaborated with Armstrong Powerhouse to produce a model. Waggonz worked on the visual side of things, whilst AP worked on the sounds and scripting. This was the first published attempt of a pacer, and it was considered to be highly functional and detailed at the time. When you compare it to Dovetail's attempt, however, visually the age of the Waggonz model begins to show. The front end of the Waggonz pacer looks a little bulbous, whilst the Dovetail one looks closer to the real thing. However, I do think that the bodywork on the Dovetail model is a bit too reflective. The Waggonz model came bundled with a number of liveries that the 142 wore in the past and ones that they were still wearing whilst being operational at the time of this pack's release. It also featured automatic numbering, meaning that the fleet number would be the same on the front and rear cabs. The Dovetail model was only produced with the provincial and regional railways liveries and lacked the auto numbering. The Waggonz cab featured beige and blue panelled variants alongside sub-variants that were dependent on the type of destination blind. Those with traditional destination blinds feature their manual control handle, whilst those fitted with electronic dot matrix display boards featured a computer. In terms of the overall detailing, I thought that it was very good for its time. However, as time has progressed and modelling techniques have evolved, the Dovetail cab looks much brighter and more detailed. This is, however, the only variant of the cab, and the bugbear that I have with it visually is that the instrumentation appears to have been recycled from the 143 and 144, including the instrument lighting. There was no physical passenger view produced for the Waggonz 142. Instead, the train was able to spawn passengers in and out of the interior when loading at stations. I thought this was quite clever. Dovetail produced a physical passenger view, however, and I feel that it clearly demonstrates how basic the interior design was for these trains in real life. The camera movement is, however, restrictive. In terms of overall functionality, the Waggonz cab featured a functional master key, AWS, driver reminder appliance, working headlights, cab lights, instrument lights, opening windows, driver changeable destination blinds, operational sander, wipers, two-tone horn, and compressor speed up. The Dovetail model had similar functionality, however, it lacked the compressor speed up, and the destination blinds could only be altered in the scenario editor. In terms of the driving experience, the Waggonz model felt pretty challenging. Acceleration was slow, and there was wheel slip functionality, though it wasn't quite up to the same standard as it is these days. I found that the brakes were quite strong and a bit too sensitive to keyboard inputs. Conversely, I would say that the Dovetail throttle controlled too smoothly, whilst the brakes felt that they were stepped properly. Physics-wise, like the Waggonz model, acceleration is relatively slow. Looking at the brake gauge, however, I would say that the brakes are a bit too strong. Sound-wise, I thought that AP's first attempts were quite convincing. The sound design included the basic features that we have in newer packs today, such as the separate internal and external running sounds. However, they haven't aged all that well, and you can tell that it has relied upon the use of stock sounds, such as the squeals and track clatter. The horn also sounded a bit synthetic. That said, however, I felt that they were generally realistic and authentic. By complete contrast, the default running sounds on the Dovetail model were not very realistic or authentic, and let's be brutally honest, they were pretty naff. Before we dive into AP's second attempt at the 142, as mentioned earlier, this is the Dovetail model, so naturally you may be curious as to why this is branded as a rolling stock pack instead of an enhancement pack. In exchange for allowing Dovetail to use their Class 158/159 enhancements on the Huddersfield line, AP were given the ability to make changes to the 142's raw files before conversion for use in Train Simulator. Externally, AP reduced the reflectiveness of the body and improved the texturing. The interior passenger models were also removed. By default, the original model came with folding doors. With access to the raw files, AP were also able to produce a variant with the single leaf doors that replaced the original sets later on in the train's lifespan. In total, there are 18 liveries, and these include BR Chocolate and Cream, Provincial, GMPTE, Regional Railways, Tyne and Wear, Northern Spirit, Arriva Trains Northern, First North Western, First Great Western, Merseyrail, Northern Rail, Valley Lines, Arriva Trains Wales, and Transport for Wales. Branding is applied via a freely available and separate branding patch. Amongst the 18 base liveries, there are a plethora of sub-variants that have transitional logos of the privatised operating companies that would inherit the units for further workings. Internally, the cab has had a complete overhaul. The camera is better positioned, the lighting modified, and the accuracy of the cab controls, gauges and texture quality have been improved. The cabs are available in beige and blue panelling. They are also fitted with a fully functional master key, automatic warning system, train protection warning system, driver reminder appliance, NRN and GSMR. Other functions include working wipers, cab fan, window blinds, sliding cab windows, and operation of the interior cab, instrument, destination blind and saloon lights. The two-tone horn, controlled by H and B, has 4 different sounds, which can be cycled through by pressing Ctrl and H and Ctrl Shift and H respectively. Notably, the 142s only had nighttime headlights at first. Daytime lights were added later, and these have been represented too. The passenger view has also been improved with livery-dependent interior design, modified lighting, additional camera angles, and animation of the interior doors and saloon lights. On the sound front, surprisingly, all 3 engine and gearbox combinations that were mentioned earlier have been represented. Although the use of Leyland TL11s on 142s has been well documented, AP admitted that they were not aware of them, and to be honest, I can't blame them. There doesn't seem to be a lot of videos or sound recordings of TL11 142s in action. The only exception is this video, which I shall link in the description below. Based on it, I feel that AP have been able to produce a nice representation. The sound of the engine winding up and down through the gear changes on the RRE5 box is also quite pleasing. When the TL11 is paired with the Voice box, I find that the engine roars more aggressively. There is also a distinctive transmission whine, which would carry over to the Cummins powered units. Out of the three, I find that the Cummins engines sound the best. They are heavy in bass and will give any subwoofer a good workout. I also find them to be a big improvement over the original sound set that was made for the Waggonz model. For example, the engine sounds more true to life and there is less reliance on the use of synthesizers. Collectively, the three sound sets share many of the same features. The cab is nice and quiet when the windows are closed. When they are open, in addition to hearing the engine a bit more, you also attain a greater sense of movement with the wind rushing past. The bass's iconic screeching wheel flanges and track joint clatter have also been well implemented, and overall, the sounds are far more realistic than Dovetails by leaps and bounds, and the Cummins set is a more cohesive upgrade over AP's first original set. In terms of driving, the train's performance will be different across the three engine and gearbox combos. The TL11 and RRE5 combo will be the most challenging. The rate of acceleration tends to be pretty sluggish. The train may also find the hills a bit of a struggle, and you may have to hold the gears whilst climbing a harsh gradient. When the TL11 is paired with the VoIP box, acceleration is better, gear changes are more consistent, and performance improves a bit more with the Cummins unit. In terms of braking and bringing the train to a stop, the 142 employs the use of a 3-step tread brake. This means that braking performance will be weaker at higher speeds than at lower speeds. Brake force is at its strongest at 10 miles an hour, so ideally you want to come to a stop at step 1 to avoid jolting of passengers. Basic performance characteristics aside, randomly generated power and braking factors have been implemented. This means that the train will accelerate and brake at different rates each time it is loaded into a scenario. As the driver, it will be your responsibility to get a feel of how the unit is handling. More up-to-date wheel slip and wheel side will also add to the challenge of driving in damp rail conditions. At busier times, a Class 142 would also find itself working in multiple with a fellow classmate, or, as demonstrated here, a member of the Sprinter family. This pack has full compatibility with AP's Class 156 and 150/2 rolling stock packs, as well as the Class 150/1 and Class 158 enhancement packs. When running in multiple with another unit, there is a small delay in the trailing unit's engine applying power. In addition to the previously mentioned horn factor, this pack also features clag factor and bounce factor. The clag factor, activated with Control and C and Shift and C respectively, refers to the amount of smoke generated by the train's exhaust. At factor 1, the smoke is at its cleanest, whilst at factor 10, the smoke is at its dirtiest. Bounce factor, activated with Control and B and Shift and B respectively, simulates the rough ride the Pacers were well known for. Bounce factor can vary on a scale between off and 5, with factors 1 to 4 probably being the best representations of the train's ride quality. Bounce factor 5 is very, very bouncy, and as acknowledged in the manual, it isn't the most representative, but it was clearly added for fun, and I appreciate that. 6 scenarios are included, 3 for Manchester Victoria to Leeds via Huddersfield, and 3 for the North Wales coast Crewe to Holyhead route. The scenarios are set at different times of day and weather conditions. Each scenario has its own challenge, from negotiating the tough gradients on the Huddersfield line with the TL11 and RRE5 powered 142 to being kept on your toes with semi-simulated request stops on the North Wales coast. So is there anything that I feel that could have made this pack better? Well, I feel that it would have been nice to have a variant of the cab without the DRA and TPWS panels for the earlier variants of the 142. Additionally, I would have liked to have seen the implementation of the functional roller blind handle and destination computer where applicable like those featured in the Waggonz cab. At the time of review, I also noticed a gap between the doors on the passenger view. This was probably an oversight on Dovetail's part, and it probably explains why the passenger view was restrictive by default. Whilst the 142 makes good use of AP's body roll script first seen on the Class 205 pack, I've also wondered whether it would be possible to have the body bounce externally and have it integrated with a bounce factor. For my closing thoughts, AP and Waggonz' first model has served its purpose well, and it can now enjoy a happy retirement in a galaxy far, far away. With the more accurate model, number of features and better overall performance, the 142 2.0 pack makes for a compelling upgrade. It can be used on many payware and freeware routes, and nitpicks aside, I feel that it is now the best version of the Pacer available. Thanks for watching this review. I hope that you have found it to be helpful and informative. Please feel free to subscribe if you wish to follow me and be notified about future content like this video or similar. If you enjoyed the video, pressing the like button would be greatly appreciated, and if you wish to support the channel further, please feel free to leave a donation on my Ko-fi page or by pressing YouTube's Super Thanks button. Thanks again for your time and take care.